Father, thank you that you gave us your Son. Thank you that you give us your Spirit and you've given us your scriptures, Father. Make us into the people you want us to be, a people that honors you and loves you. Thank you for the book of Hebrews and how it shows and teaches the supremacy of Jesus. And there is nothing higher than him. Thank you for the promises and redemption we have through him. I pray you would be with us as we look at this lesson, Father. May you be honored by it, and may it be something that you can use to open our hearts and minds and to draw closer to you. We love you, and we ask these things in your Son's name. Amen. I talked to Nathan a little earlier today. I said, how many are usually on Wednesday? He said, maybe about 20. We blew through that. I have 11 copies of the notes tonight. And I thought, okay, we'll do a couple extra because married couples and stuff like that. So I can make more next week or something like that. So if you want them, I'll have them up here. Last Wednesday night, as we were getting ready for VBS, I went upstairs to do something, and Nathan was up there waiting for his class to start, and he said, hey, could you teach next Wednesday? Okay. I said, what are you teaching? He says, book of Hebrews. Okay, he picked something really light. I said, what would you like me to teach? He said, well, you can keep on going with what I'm going, or you can do kind of a one-off sort of thing. He said that the thing he didn't feel like he really did a good job on was kind of the introduction and the background historical context. And he says, that seemed like that'd be down your alley. He said, I can do that. I know when I'm teaching something, and if I've got a direction that I'm going, it's really difficult for me to turn that over to somebody because they don't know which direction I'm really going. So it's like I don't get in the way of where they're going. So tonight you get something a little different. This is going to be more of a sort of a history class, but it's not. It's one that the more I looked into it, the more questions I got, and it went deeper and deeper and deeper. And the neat thing about studying the Bible is it has lots of rabbit holes, and you can go down, a phrase I learned a long time ago, I've heard of, take a rabbit trail, because I got into a lot of the Jewish stuff, ended up calling them rabbi trails. Rabbis are notorious. Jewish rabbis are notorious for taking trails. In Hebrews, that's very much the case. If you take the whole book of Hebrews, the whole letter, and you cut out these trails, it's about 2 pages long. It's not very long because the way the writer writes, this is not in my notes, so this is free, so there's no charge on this. He'll start and he'll make a statement, maybe a short statement, and then all of a sudden he'll go around, come back around, take this trail and really expand on that and come back here, and then he's back to the storyline, and then he does this. If you cut out the rabbit trails, the rabbi trails, whatever, you end up having a much shorter book. And I was thinking, I've got a copy of Hebrews, kind of a Reader's Digest version, and I was originally going to read that. And the more I got into it, it's like there's no chance. There's not enough time. My wife and I just got finished watching a TV series, the second series called The Chosen. It's phenomenal. This is not an ad for that, but it was really good. In looking at this lesson, it has brought a lot of things to life. Can't recommend this too highly. It's accurate. It's not a verse by verse type of thing, but you get to see the characters develop, and you get to see how the disciples didn't get along with each other. And the fellow that plays Jesus, he's got a sense of humor. You get to see him discipling these guys, and he lets them fight sometimes and things like that, but they're all united in him. And it's only the second season, and they're going to go 7 seasons, and it's not paid for by any big thing. It's paid for by the viewers. I can't say enough about it. But what is good, how it's helped me in looking at this, it helps me see the writer, whoever the writer was, it may be Paul or Barnabas, but whoever the writer was, what he was writing to, the people he was writing to. The book of Hebrews, it's what they call one of the general epistles. You know, you have the Pauline epistles, and you have the Gospels, and Revelation and stuff, but they was one of the general epistles. It was probably written sometime around 67 A.D. These dates are important because what we're going to look at is a date here and a date here and a date here, and things happen we're all happening at the same time. It's not just a one, this happened here and then this happened over here. A lot of different things were happening, and they made a difference in people's lives. The writer is trying to present to a group of people that were getting ready to leave the faith. His point in the whole book was to encourage them to stay with the faith that you've been brought to. A lot of the people he was writing to would be people that they were, in this case, primarily Jewish converts. Because the book of Hebrews, Jews, they had a special situation going on with them that the Gentiles didn't have. When you read the book of Hebrews, it's a difficult book, especially if you don't have much knowledge of what went on in the Old Testament, the Torah, the first 5 books, because those laws and things laid down there, the Jews had it was just bred into them to know these laws and to follow them. And when you became a believer, the Orthodox Jews, the people that had stayed just straight Jewish, they had a real problem with you because it's like you had left. In a lot of cases, it was like you had left the family. You didn't exist. And it's that way in a lot of the world now. When the writer writes, he says, he's telling them, this is your supreme hope. This is your hope. If you go back to what you were, you walk away from this. And he's encouraging them to take the step, stay here, see it through. And he brings up Moses, and he brings up, it's a book of faith, it's a book of patience, it's a book of encouragement, but it means especially a lot to the Jewish believers, especially the ones that are really having a hard time. If there's any questions, please ask them. You can throw something at me, yell something.
I got you 10 more copies.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, pass them out to whoever. Thank you. Now that service. This book was written about, like I say, about 67 A.D. Does anybody know what happened in 70 A.D.? The temple was destroyed. It all comes into play. 3 years difference. The Jews, and we'll get to that in a minute, the Jews had existed throughout the Roman Empire for centuries. They just got scattered over the years when they went into bondage in Babylon and Assyria and things like that. And finally, they were allowed to come back to the Promised Land. That's Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel and things. Very few of them actually came back to the Promised Land. They stayed and kind of assimilated into the area. So the Jews scattered all over, and they had been there. Generally, they would be treated with respect, but not a whole lot. If they were somebody that had made a big difference in the community, they might be treated nicely. But as a general thought, anti-Semitism ran deep in the Roman Empire. They were Philo is a Jewish philosopher. He wrote a real brutal treatment in Alexandria, and then he talks about the temple being destroyed. The Jews brought a lot of their problems on themselves. We'll look at that in a minute. But the Jews that were out into, that had left Israel and stuff, that was called the diaspora. They're scattered around. And so a lot of the things that Paul might write to or James might write to with a Hebraic thought would be written to the diaspora in a lot of cases, to the people out there. Because they had lived out away from from the land of Israel, they had to learn how to get along in the world outside. They had to learn how to get along in the Gentile world. By doing that, they could kind of stay a little under the radar. They could do business and things like that. They went to their synagogues, which would kind of where the idea of where we get a church, but they would meet together. But they were doing business with the Gentiles. And if they kept quiet and kept their nose clean and stuff like that, it just kind of went smooth. But if the Gentiles or anyone decided to attack spiritually Israel and stuff like that, the Israelites would go berserk. Everybody know who the Maccabees were? In between the Old Testament and New Testament, there are some books called the Apocrypha, and one of those books is the Maccabees. And that tells the story of when this evil Syrian general comes in, Antiochus Epiphanes, and he comes in and he doesn't want to destroy the Jews. He wants to change them, turn them into Greeks, and to accept Greek gods and to become Greek. That didn't fit well with the Jews. They revolted. Antiochus Epiphanes was kind of a superpower. The Jews weren't much, but it affected the Jews so much and made them furious that they got a band together. Antiochus had taken over Jerusalem, and within 2 to 3 years, the Jews had kicked this superpower out of Jerusalem. They were going to follow God to the point of death. I don't know if I'd be ready to do that, but they did. When the Romans took over, the success depended on getting along with the Romans and getting along with the Jewish leaders. And the Jewish leaders were the Sanhedrin. That was the top rabbis and Pharisees and Sadducees, 70 of them. And that was the Sanhedrin. And that was the Jewish high court. It was the Supreme Court. there was no appealing past there. And so the Jews, they dealt with their Sanhedrin, but you had to deal with guys like Pontius Pilate and Herod, who was a king over the Jews, but he had been put in by the Romans, and they had to get along with him. So they have to play both ends against the middle just to survive. When the Romans came in, they made Judaism a protected religion. They let them do their synagogues, have your festivals, do all your Jewish stuff, pay your taxes, don't cause trouble, and be nice. If you did that, the Romans said, we're good. Well, some of these people in Sanhedrin and these upper rabbis, they were smart enough, they could turn the procurators like Pontius Pilate inside out. They knew how to think. They were really sharp. But the peace was there. It was always, you had groups that wanted to fight and groups that wanted the peace and groups just trying to get along, and they all lived in Israel. There was four main groups of Jews. You had the Sadducees, which was the rich kind of ruling class. They more or less had control of the Sanhedrin. They believed in the first 5 books, the Torah, the written. None of the prophets and things like that. It was the written law. They didn't believe in life after death. And to understand that, they come up one time to ask Jesus, they're going to trip him up, and they're asking questions about the afterlife. Jesus goes, you guys, you don't even believe in this stuff. That was, well, anyway. You had the Pharisees. They were from following the Torah and the law and the prophets, they would seek to do that as accurately as possible. They wanted it right. And they were the ones that Jesus had the harshest words for. Because you had the Torah, you had the laws, and so what they would do would be to come up with traditions. Okay, you can't do this. You can't gather grain on the Sabbath. Okay, but to make sure you do that, you can't travel this far, and you can't travel this far. And they kept putting these hedges on there. And here's the law, which said, honor the Sabbath day. Okay, but by the time it's over, they're this far away from the law, and they're driven crazy by the traditions. They said, well, if you don't do this and you can't do this, it made life miserable for them. And Jesus came along, and he turned the Pharisees into knots. He tied them into knots because he says, you got all this stuff? This is what it means. And that drove the Pharisees crazy too, because he was speaking with authority. And he was only 30. You need to go through higher learning in order to interpret law. And Jesus at 30 was interpreting it when you see that when he's talking with Nicodemus. He says, you got to be born again. Nicodemus, how do you do that? Jesus says, he didn't say you're one of the teachers. He said, you are the teacher of Israel. That's the highest class. He is the lawyer's lawyer. And Jesus, a guy probably half his age, is explaining it to him. Then you had the Essenes. That's the Dead Sea Scroll people. They lived out away from everybody else. And that's just an interesting study. And then you had the Zealots, which today you would call them terrorists. They were Jewish terrorists. It's interesting for me, I say it's interesting, all this stuff's interesting. Jesus had Simon the Zealot. he also had Matthew the tax collector. Zealots would kill a tax collector like that because they were the lowest of the low. They were a Jew who turned their back on their people and worked for the enemy and then stole money on top of it. A zealot wouldn't think twice about cutting their throat. Jesus got one of each. That would make for an interesting dinner sometime. Their idea was to kill in the name of God, to maintain the purity of Israel. And that is not what Jesus said. That's not what he taught. So when Jesus would take a guy, make him a disciple like Simon the Zealot, it would raise the Romans' eyebrows. Because he's got somebody, they don't see, for him, they don't see the difference one day from another when this person became a believer in Jesus and he drops his daggers and things. He becomes this. He still has a lot to unlearn, but the Romans wouldn't know that. All I know is this guy was a zealot then, he's a zealot now, he needs to be killed. Eventually, the Romans begin to see, as Christianity went throughout the Roman world, they begin to see that there is a difference between Christians and Jews, straight Jews. Because the believers, the Christians who had been Jews, they had a concept that was absolutely foreign to Gentiles. The Jews had inbred into them the concept of a Messiah. Messiah is going to come, rescue them, and set them free. The Gentiles had no concept of that. They didn't get it. On Sunday in class, me and Anthony are teaching, we're in John. And we will eventually get through the first chapter. And we've been on it for two and a half months now. And we are up to verse 14. So we're almost halfway through the chapter. When John wrote, he wrote the letter of John, by my understanding, somewhere probably between 90 and 100. That's just my understanding. And when he wrote to the Romans and the Gentiles about the Messiah, but he reached a middle ground with them. It says, in the beginning was the Word. Verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among man. The Gentiles had a myriad of gods, Jupiter and Mars and Pan and all of them. And the Greek gods were like, it was a drunk frat boy party all the time. They were, people brought offerings to them so that the gods would leave them alone. Jesus came as Messiah. He came in the flesh. The Gentiles could not comprehend a God in flesh. It's just like the gods are out there. They don't come down and consort with humans. And what Jesus did, God, before time, he comes down and he prepared before time began. He came down and he steps into this world as a human. He is a living, breathing Messiah. He died and was resurrected. Well, how can you kill God? Well, that's the end of the story. They didn't understand it. And what John did, he used that term, the Word. That was where the connection was made. It was like the Greeks saw the Word, the Logos, And the Jews saw Messiah, and they call it, the word was Memra is the word. And that was a place where they could both come together. And finally the Romans started saying, something's different here. What the question is we could ask is, why would any of them want to return to Judaism? Like I say, the Jews were a protected religion. Finally, they start seeing some differences, and after a while, due to a series of things, one of them which we'll talk about, the Christians came out from under that protective umbrella. The Romans just saw them for a long time as part of the Jews. And then all of a sudden they start saying, there's something more going on here. Judaism was not an evangelical type of belief. Christianity is basically evangelistic. By the time Hebrews was written, there were thousands of Gentiles as believers compared to maybe one Jew that had become a believer. It was very Gentile. So imagine that persecution's coming. And you can see persecution. It's getting bad as a Christian. You're not under the protective umbrella of Rome anymore. If they saw you, they could kill you, no problem. The Jews had some rights. Not a whole lot, but they had some. Imagine you're a father, wife, 4 and 5 kids, and he's a believer. Their whole family has become believers in Jesus as the Messiah. And he's sitting there thinking one day, and he sees all the bad stuff coming down the road. And generally in life, it doesn't get better. Things get worse. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Everything goes to disarray. That's why we get gray hair. That's why we get wrinkles. That's why you guys are not going to be immortal forever. Not that you are, but I remember being young and it seemed like I was going to be young forever, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm late 60s. Where did it go that way? This guy thinks it's not looking good. And the way the Romans are, it's not necessarily going to get any better. I have a wife and 4 kids, 5 kids. I'm a Christian. They're coming after the Christians. The Jews, on the other hand, they have some protection. God gave me this family. I know he said, take up your cross and follow me, but this is real. What am I supposed to do? God gave me this family. He gave me this job. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to protect my family. Maybe it'd be better if I went back to being a Jew and being protected. I might still believe Messiah and all this, but over here, it's really not safe. It's the Wild West on Christians. That's what somebody would be dealing with. The writer of Hebrews, this is basically his message. The message of Hebrews is the superiority of Jesus. The superiority of Jesus would have been particularly important to the Jewish Christians in Rome who were struggling under Nero's persecution and were considering moving back towards the Mosaic law. The writer of the Hebrews showed these Jewish Christian believers that, though they were faced with suffering, they were indeed following a better way, and they should persevere. Jesus asked a lot, but is it worth it? Yeah. If it comes down to that, if they start pounding on our doors, what do we do when it becomes real? We've got it so easy. Imagine if you were a Christian in Iran. Don't want to. In Matthew 24, we're going to start tying some more of this together. In Matthew 24, Jesus is talking in that chapter about an upcoming persecution, the destruction of the temple. And he's giving them warning. There's a whole lot there. But it says, it speaks about the destruction of the temple, and there's a dire warning to those, quote, those who are in Judea, flee to the mountains when they see the enemy show up. Hebrews was written just a couple of years before the destruction of the temple. So when whoever wrote Hebrews, he wrote it with all the stuff going on in Rome with Nero. I think he wrote it to them also. Jesus gives them fair warning. It's 40 years and the temple's gone. They got a short time. And they thought, God can't mess with us. We're his people. God says, well, we got some problems. And he dealt with them. Nero is probably the best known of all the emperors. He was a character, to say the least. He was emperor from 54 to 68. He was the 5th emperor of Rome, part of the last of the Claudius Caesar, Julius Caesar line. The emperor Claudius, he was adopted by the Roman Emperor Claudius at age 13. And Nero succeeded his adopted dad when he was 17. He became emperor at 17. How many of you guys are 17? Any of you? You're older than that. You 20? Okay. 19? How are you older? If you were 20, you would have been emperor of the world for 3 years. At 19, I didn't know where the bathroom was. And this guy's ruling the world. He did some stuff when he started it's like he started with good intentions. His mom was kind of co-ruler with him, and he ended up having a falling out with her, so she gets exiled, and he ends up murdering his mom. It's a great family. And he just gets worse and worse. He starts spiraling down. He became popular with the lower class citizens because he would build some nice things and do things for them, but he wasn't real popular with the Senate because he started kind of going around them and not paying any attention to them. And the Senate was supposed to be the supreme judges, but the emperors could tend to bypass that if they wanted to, if they got big enough. What is Nero most famous for? Fiddling while Rome burned. Okay? That happened around July the 18th, so we're almost at the anniversary, AD 64. Temple's destroyed in AD 70. This is 6 years before that. A lot of people thought that Nero did the fire on purpose. He was the brains behind that. The fiddling, that's one of those stories, whether he did or not. He was not happy to see a good chunk of Rome be burned up because he had things to build, new stuff to build. So we'll kill a bunch of people, clear it out, and then I'll build these great buildings and stuff like that there, and everyone will love me. He didn't, it doesn't work that way. But Hitler being the protege, or I guess that's the right way it is, of Nero, did the same thing. Nero said, I need a scapegoat. The Christians. Hitler said, it's the Jews. I need a scapegoat for all of our problems. Nero goes on this rampage. I think when he went on his rampage against the Christians, it was primarily more localized. Domitian, who came later, he said, all bets are off, go get them, any place they are. So he got the scapegoat, blamed it on the Christians, and he started doing things like burning them at the stake, wrapping them in skins, burning them for lamps, torturing them, feeding them to the lions, all that stuff. He had a heyday. And if you read about some of the stories of the Colosseum, how big it was and stuff like that, we think some of the stuff we see on TV is really bad. It was like they had, maybe once a week they had Kids' Day. Everybody went to see the Christians be eaten and killed and slaughtered. The smell would get so bad they had guys walking through the lanes squirting perfume so people didn't get sick from the smell of blood. It was horrible. Nero got his scapegoat. But about this time, tradition says that Paul was beheaded during Nero's rule. And maybe Peter was crucified upside down during that. Whether that was the exact time or not, it's very Nero-esque that would happen. Okay, in the year 66, there's 2 more years left of Nero. The Jews in Judea rebelled. This wasn't the first time. This is a long line of rebellions. But a lot of things had happened to cause the Jews to rebel. They weren't completely without reason for what they did. They just didn't decide, let's rebel today, take on the Roman Empire. They didn't do that. But generals had come in and they had set up standards and they had set up busts of people and stuff like that, and they pushed a little bit too far. And the Jews revolted. And this went on for a bit. And by the year 68, Nero committed suicide. The generals and stuff had enough of him. And so they were chasing him down, and he says, oh, suicide's the better part of valor. He took his life. But Nero had ordered the general Vespasian to take Israel, but primarily Jerusalem, which was where the hotbed was. Vespasian comes in, and he's doing all this. Nero dies, and power hates vacuum. And by a series of things, Vespasian, he ends up the emperor, taking Nero's place. His son Titus, Dad says, go get him, and went after the Jews. The study of that Jewish war, just type in 70 AD war, and you read about it. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable how the Jews held out. They're inside Jerusalem. They had prepared for a siege. They had years worth of food ready. When you're a zealot and you'll kill people, you don't think real clear. Ask Hamas. They will blow themselves up. I don't get it. Well, this zealot says, how can we make the people fight harder? We'll burn the food. There was already kind of starting to be a famine. You know, they were going to dole that out. Burn the food. Now they don't have food. The Romans have completely surrounded Jerusalem. What do? Well, at Passover time, it was one of the laws that the Jews, the male Jews, had to come to Jerusalem. Passover feasts and stuff like that. So what Titus, the Romans did, go on in. They let the Jews go on in, but they didn't let them leave. So they packed the town with tons more people, exacerbated this famine they ended up having. It got so bad, and forgive me for getting graphic, but this is the stuff that went on, and it goes on today. Mothers would steal food from their babies. They would kill their kids and eat them. It was absolutely horrific, straight out of the gates of hell. It takes them a while, but finally the Romans get in there, and it takes them forever to take down the whole city. They get to the temple. Okay? I mean, they're killing everybody. Nobody gets out alive. They get to the temple, and they hate the Jews so bad because so many of their people have gotten killed. The Jews fought dirty too, but so many of their other soldiers had gotten killed. It was like it was just bloodlust. And Titus tried to stop these Roman soldiers from burning down the temple. And this is one time it was a mutiny. We're burning it, and they did. And people were stacked up all over. It was horrible. Hebrews is a book that says, you may die. You may die a horrible death. Your kids may die a horrible death. But this Messiah, this Jesus, is worth it. He's the answer. He gives life. You have to stay with him, or you've got nothing. Anyway, sorry if I got too graphic. Wait, did we stop at 9:40 or 7:45 or? Huh? Is that about right? Okay. Okay. Are there any questions? Yes.
Because the temple held a lot of gold, and gold has a little melting point that whenever it melted down into the cracks in the ground. So even after all the fighting was over with and all the looting, pillaging had been over and done with, that was one of the ways in which you can see how God kept his promise that not one stone of the temple foundation would be left remaining, because scavengers afterward would come in to find that little bit of gold in the cracks of the rocks after pulling the rocks out of the clay and get to it. I don't have that information.
I walked over there because this last week I lost my hearing aids and don't know where they went. What he said, so people online can hear, the Romans, there was so much gold in the temple. If I'm getting this right, there was so much gold in the temple, and gold has a low melting point, that the gold would melt and go down into the stones. And so that when the Romans got done with the temple, it says no stone shall be left unturned. There was a reason for that. They were going for the gold, to get the gold. And the prophecies that no stone will be unturned. So God always does his prophecies. Any other questions? I hope that this has been helpful. When your real teacher comes back next week, when Nathan comes back next week, you can really start learning again. For me, this is really enjoyable because I've looked at the book of Hebrews, and I've taught it before, but it was just like all of a sudden, this took a whole different turn than what I originally had in mind. And I'm really glad because the pieces all started coming together when the times overlapped. I never got that before. And so God gives, through the writers and stuff, he gives them a last minute, this is your reprieve, this is it. And he's good about that. Anyway, if we're early, we're going to close early. Let's close with prayer. Holy Father, thank you for your word. Father, the history of man is horrible as a general rule. We mess it up. People fight and kill and murder. They do it in your name, Father. Father, who is man that you should be mindful of him? Thank you that you're mindful of us. Father, thank you that we here know your Son, our Messiah. Thank you for saving us, redeeming us through him. Father, we love you. Help us to be the people you are making us into. Thank you for your disciplines, no matter how hard they are. Thank you for your kindness and your graciousness towards us. Go with us, Father. Help us to lift you up and to serve each other. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen.